Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Lopez, and I am the Dean of the Claire Trevor School of the Arts. It's my honor to welcome you all here this evening. I'd like to begin by giving a huge thank you to Joe Davies, Natasha Logis, our conference organizers, our team, and all of you here today for your passion for the work and efforts to be here together in community for this extraordinary conference. I'm very honored and proud for the Claire Trevor School of the Arts and the Music Department to be hosting Women at the Piano. Our mission is to educate and support artists and creative leaders and uplift their bringing their whole selves to all they do. If you can't see it, it's hard to imagine you can be it. One of the central questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is asking who is not in the room and why. In preparing for this welcome, I asked myself, who were all the Latina pianists I knew? It occurred to me that in my 30 years of work in United States-based Latinx cultural arts, I do not know a Latina pianist. In editing and that says as much about me as anything else, I'm sure, but it speaks to where is it in the broader public imaginary to have a broad frame of reference and have those voices readily available. When I shared that story with Natasha prior to coming into the room, she said, "Oh, you have to meet this person, Gabriela Montero." And I said, this is why these conferences and encounters are so important, because we begin to talk about who's not in the room, who are we needing to uplift, and from there we can make connections and broader the frame of reference and who comes to join us on the stage. I realized that in preparing for this welcome and asking that question, it reminded me of when I edited my anthology, Growing Up Chicana Chicano, and I turned in the manuscript. The call was to put together 20 short stories, and I got a very perplexed call from my editor saying, "This is way too short." I said, what do you mean? He said, the other volumes in the series, this is like micro short stories. It doesn't match up. Why are these so short? And I realized that at that time in the early 90s, there weren't yet a generation of writers, Latino writers coming out of MFA programs. They were writing in between their jobs and caretaking for others. And so the form of their lives, the meaning of their lives was informing the form of the stories being so short. Like the short story, the matter of having access informs who is playing, as well as having intentional encouragement and support to play. And again, I think about our first generation artists in the making and about the piano, just the size of the piano, the need to have access to the piano, to have lessons for the piano. Recently, our own, UCI's own, our colleague Lorna Griffith, a woman at the piano, I was talking with her. She shared with me she's a first generation student. And I said, how did you come to be a pianist and be encouraged to play the piano? She had someone in her family and in her circle who encouraged her and made sure that that access was there. I'm also thinking about the films, The Piano, The Frontiersman, how the women in those films, that's part of documenting the history of women in the piano, the importance of the piano as their access to voice and their vision while they're battling circumstances of colonization and patriarchy. And then I also think about the pianist Hazel Scott, who's an important influenced the African-American pianist Hazel Scott on Alicia Keys, and who played with Charles Mingus and just sharing her as someone in the repertoire as well, and looking at the recital tonight with Antonio's playing women composers, just it reminded me of thinking about Hazel Scott having Charles Mingus in her band and support, playing alongside with her. I'm very excited about how this conference focuses on women and internationally engages diversity, equity, and inclusion by bringing together people across disciplines and all facets of musical production, both in person and online. Joe and Natasha's invitation to bring visibility to women at the piano has led to a rich range of presentations, and this evening's recital by Antonio Oyarzabal of work by female composers. That a male pianist is playing the work of women is important because it reflects the conference's commitments while celebrating the work of women pianists and composers. It also reflects how performance and scholarship go hand in hand. This conference is intentionally designing a conversation. I'm incredibly excited to be here and welcome all of you, and eager to see what will follow from it. Thank you very much, and welcome.
More than welcome, and we promise we won't be very long.
Hi.
You're here.
Welcome everyone to our post-concert conversation. Natasha and I are honored to have this opportunity to thank Antonio and to enter into his creative world for a few minutes. So thank you so much for this powerful, deeply moving performance and for conjuring up myriad musical and geographical cultures for us. And importantly, for the theme of this conference, inviting us to listen together to women's creative voices through the ages. Before we launch into the conversation, I want to take this opportunity to thank Dean Tiffany Lopez, not only for the inspiring welcome, but for the vision that she brings to the Claire Trevor School of the Arts, and for all that she does to support our work here and to make enterprises like this possible. I also want to acknowledge UCI Illuminations, the Chancellor's Arts and Culture Initiative, for support towards this evening's event. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us and being part of this journey here with Antonio. So to kick things off, I'll start with an open question, and that is, what was your source of inspiration? How did you embark on this wonderful project of pioneering this music by women composers?
I always say I was very lucky that some of my teachers introduced me to some female composers without mentioning the fact that they were female or male or something. So I am very lucky. I'm aware that that is not necessarily the norm. But when I was 14, I was already playing some Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. And then because of my huge interest in French music, I discovered the three pieces that I performed tonight by Lily Boulanger quite early, and I was performing them in programs by 2015, 16. And then I also with TFR, which I also knew from before because I've always been in love with the music by Lessis. So kind of all these French influences and all these French pieces in programs that developed into wanting to go further and construct a program of all these pieces that I was never told about in history of music lessons. But I knew they were there. It's just that I didn't understand why they weren't mentioned when the value was obviously so huge.
This is inspiring, and I was struck by the age. You said 14, right? And often we encounter in our teaching that students at university level are encountering music by women for the first time. So to hear that, it's really inspiring to all of us here. I'll hand over to Natasha for a question now.
Yeah, I want to ask about developing autonomy of thought, because you said just now you knew this music's out there, but I don't know how the pianists in this room feel, but it takes tremendous artistic courage and autonomy to decide that something is worth playing when there is nothing out there in the world to affirm that. And you are very young, and you are, I didn't mean that in a patronizing way at all, but where does that autonomy of thought come from? And a second question in relation to that, how is that something that how can we as educators foster that kind of autonomy in our students?
That's such a big question.
Do the first bit first.
Right. I always talk about curiosity because that was the motor for me. Like, same as I was interested in perhaps the lesser known pieces by Debussy, right? He has an amazing ballad that is never played, and I always loved all these pieces that weren't as played. And so discovering at the piano, reading, and spending some time with the pieces because of that curiosity that I was telling you about that drove me there. If you have the means and you've studied not only pianistically but also theoretically, then you will realize the value of those pieces, and you will have some criteria to judge, although I don't like that word, but to select, to conform a program or another. And yeah, I don't know if that answers.
Partially. So let's say I were a student in this room and I'm thinking, that was a really inspiring program. If you start to look at music by women, as we've seen over the past 3 days, you're not talking about a few hundred pieces, you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pieces of music. So this process of curation is a little bit like discovering the internet for the first time, isn't it? You think, oh my goodness, there's an awful lot of stuff out there, and the first thing that you can feel is overwhelm.
Yeah.
So it would be really interesting to hear your processes. Do you just, I mean, how do you search, and then what happens? Tell us a bit what goes into the work away from the keyboard before you get to this point.
Well, I always question myself, what do I want to play as well? And how does that go with other pieces in a program that I want to construct? Or for instance, maybe with a clear example is easier. For my latest album, which is like a second part to the one I played tonight, I knew I was going to include Chaminade, not only because I love her music, but also because of the relevance of her figure. And because I love most of her pieces. But so I had the dedication to go through all the piano pieces I found. And it took me ages and ages and ages, but I went through literally all of the ones I found. I don't know if, over 100 for sure. And that is not, I know, that is not necessarily in the time of everyone and, in the means that everyone can have. But at the same time, as a teacher, I always include some music by women, and I think it's very important to, as teachers, introduce it and make it a normality. But also, not every piece is the same, so I always judge depending on, again, what do I want to play, what program do I want to bring to audiences, or what do I want this particular student to be learning, and so there is a little piece for everything.
Can I allow myself one follow-up to this? Because I'm thinking again about people in this room who want to work in the arts. And we know that promoters can often push back really hard on programs which are risky or which they perceive as risky, generally because they don't know. So what do you say when you're preparing programs and then bringing them to a promoter? What sorts of reactions do you get, and how do you respond?
Depend. In the UK.
In the world, Antonio.
Right. Because I'm based in London, as you know, and I got all sorts of reactions, some very, very positive ones of people that are very aware of the value of this music and how it is important to bring it to audiences and also to teach it. But some others that are perhaps a little bit more ancient in their thoughts, and they don't want to get away from Beethoven, Brahms, and we all love Beethoven and Brahms, but at the same time, if you allow, I don't know, another example, the love of Brahms drove me to Elisabeth born Herzogenberg, and so, but again, it's hard to say what to do with that, because that is partly again my curiosity and my love for this repertoire. How does one teach this to someone?
May I chime in and pick up on that thread of curiosity? And I want to trace the trajectory. So we've had curiosity, that's where it starts. Natasha asked the question about the learning process. And I wonder actually if you might say a few words about some of those lessons that you've learned in locating, performing, recording this repertoire. And as a follow-up question, what might your advice be in a nutshell for students who are wanting to pursue this repertoire and to come up with interpretations of music that doesn't necessarily have histories of recorded interpretations?
To not get discouraged by going to Spotify and not finding any recording of a piece and then 200 of the same Beethoven sonata. But then there is always a record, if you know how to search. It's very, very difficult at times, but there is always a little something somewhere where it tells you, if you go to this other link, that that will probably take you to the British Library, and eventually you might always ask for help. I found that I got most of the cases when I was asking for help, I received it, especially in the search of Latin American women composers, because everyone was so generous. Not so much so in other occasions, but still. And so always ask for help and don't get discouraged to not find 1,000 recordings of that particular piece, because perhaps yours will be the first one, and it's a very important deal.
And that's exciting, embarking on something for the first time. What would your process be? So you've located a score, you haven't heard about this music, and you're approaching it for the first time, what do you do? Do you try it at the piano straight away? Do you look? Do you analyze? Do you do a combination of all those things?
First of all, I converted into a PDF because it's probably it's probably pictures on my phone, and then yes, on the iPad I go to a piano and spend some time, and sometimes I was so excited because I thought, oh, this piece by Kate Loader, I'm gonna love and I'm gonna include in my programs, and then it's not what I was expecting necessarily. But this is same as I would, again, judge with a piece by a male composer. It's nothing to do with gender. But you choose what you want to play or what adapts to your necessities or likings. But yes, sorry, the process is first.
PDFs.
Yes, PDFs, and then piano, and then, selection, incorporation, learning.
Follow up to that one. So I'm thinking about the process of learning, and you have a score in front of you, and depending on your sight reading ability, you play through that music. And it's almost like meeting someone for the first time, isn't it? And you have no idea what that person is like, what this music is like. And it's only through those repeated encounters that you think, I connect with this is something I want to spend time with. Is this a process that you have managed to speed up? So, because you have done this more than any other person I know, that you can make that evaluation that says, this is going to become my friend, as opposed to, right now, this is not right for me, I'm just going to put this to one side because you can't do everything. How do you feel about that?
I think the key for me is when you said it's gradually being sped up, because in the beginning, yes, it took much longer and I didn't know what to use for my criteria, but at the same time now I do feel that something just clicks with a piece. I don't know how to explain it, I wish I could. It's something related to the language of the piece, sometimes harmonically, sometimes the texture of it, and I know if I'm gonna also do a good job with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully,
So you're sort of assembling a few pedagogical pillars for us, aren't you? I mean, we're talking about old-fashioned musicology to some extent, the ability to use a library. You've mentioned music theory. You're mentioning sight reading, which is an essential skill in this endeavor. And then there is that relationship building at the end. So I think we should open the questioning to the floor for a few minutes before we then wrap up and take a break before we party.
Great.
Questions from the floor.
Thoughts, reactions?
And what I can do, I don't know if we have a roving mic, but I'm happy to donate mine.
I think the mic in the auditorium will catch the sound, right?
Okay.
Yes, so just project.
Sarah.
Wonderful program, thank you so much. Oh, tell me why you love doing programs of all women.
Are you mad that I didn't include Clara Schumann in my program? Sorry, say the question again.
Why you love doing programs of all women composers?
Because they need to be heard, and I'm passionate about that. It's music that hasn't been heard so much, and I love it, and I love the pieces. I just think it's very good music. I know it doesn't sound very scholarly, but it is. I honestly feel like that, and I'm passionate about this repertoire. And so I also don't like tokenisms, and I'm very passionate about making sure this is not a tokenism. This is my passion, and I pursue it, and I carry on. And there is so much more repertoire that I'm planning to record and teach, which is so important, etc. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
Hi.
thank you very much. It's a wonderful program. And recently I teach piano around this area, and my adult student, actually he's a professor here, he loves woman composers, and he wants to play only woman composers or minority composers, so I'm having a hard time to find music. And yeah, today I heard many composers I never heard, Melbonis, and she's wonderful. And also last composer, she's a student of Martinu. And my last student today, he was playing Martinu, and so I was very many contacts with those composers. And I really enjoyed it. And through this conference, I participated partly online, and I learned many young composers hidden I never heard, and I heard really interesting stuff a lot. So I was wondering if you have a project to record more, not only France or Europe, but more Asian or different South America or those countries.
Yeah.
Do you have any plan?
So I recently released an album called El Fin del Silencio, The End of Silence, which is all Latin American women composers. I brought it with me here. It's for sale. So you can find 21 composers from Latin America. And I've played a lot of Karen Tanaka, a Japanese composer, and she's based in Los Angeles actually. And she's a great composer, and I plan to do more by her, for instance. Yeah.
Is it easy to find all those music?
No.
Some of it is accessible. The Melbourne pieces that you mentioned you liked, you can buy, you can purchase. I think it's with Furore Verlar. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah. If I could jump in, you said something really important earlier, which I just want to reiterate, which is that there is a community of people who are doing this work, and you have asked for help finding things and you've received it. I think the internet, again, becomes our great friend in finding our allies.
Yeah.
And if you ask people for music, 9 times out of 10, they will send it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
We have another question.
Yes, I enjoyed the recital a lot as well. From what you've played and from what you've spoken, what I'm missing is any sense of the Austro-German, and I'm just wondering how that fits in for you. Whether that's a sort of something to move around, because of course that's where all the big boys are, right? And or have I just got the wrong end of the stick because you've actually?
I actually recorded it like 3 weeks ago. I recorded Mariana Martinez Sonata in A, which is a wonderful piece, and I'm very excited for that to come out. And also Elisabeth von Herzogenberg, I've recorded. She is not Austro-German, but influences are clear in her music. Dora Pejacevic, who others? I have so many names that, but I certainly have come to that a bit later. But I'm doing it. Yes, it's so important. I agree. Thank you for pointing that out.
I think maybe one more and then we wrap up, if there is one more.
I have one.
Oh, you've got one. Oh, I've got one from the floor.
Yeah, we can have one from the floor. No, you first, please, and then I'll wrap up.
What's your biggest challenge you have faced in your life so far?
In my life? That's such a good question. Probably flying. I hate flying.
You had a long flight to get here.
Because I come from a city in Spain which is awful for landing, so I've experienced a lot of things. No, I'm joking. That is, yeah. I don't know. I feel very lucky that I haven't. Perhaps losing my grandma. That was very hard for me, actually. But apart from that and some fears, I've been quite taken care of and protected. So I'm very happy about that.
I know we've put you to a lot of work, but I want to ask one final question as a way of drawing together everything we've been thinking about, and also as a way of picking up on something the Dean said in the welcome.
I'm so sorry. Our keynote speaker has a question. So.
I missed that. Over to you, Professor Tesla.
Because we've been working a lot on professors, teachers, and their students, and it's the professors that are the most under the table, really, because people are always, you're not taking your own. And it made me think of that, because these are all sort of individual works, is a way of creating a little sort of a little mini coherence, might be to do some pairs of teacher-student that might involve males also, right? Or maybe not. There was a lot of examples in what we've been doing this whole weekend that perhaps Joe and Natasha could collect for you. Because I would be interested in hearing those relationships maybe within that environment, because it would also kind of validate, if you want, bring more attention to the kind of teacher part of it, and listening with a certain kind of directionality. So anyway, it's just an idea that occurred to me.
Or thinking about that, we could organize a program on Nadia Boulanger and all her students, for instance. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm more interested in some of these people that are not so known.
Yeah, that's
you know,
so
maybe they
interesting.
are known, but still.
Yeah. Well, I take the note of that. It's so interesting. Thank you.
Sorry, so return to you.
Yes, so returning to what the Dean said in her welcome address, the idea of moving towards equitable, inclusive pedagogies, concert culture, pedagogical practices, and how we think about these things in the music industry more generally. And I'm struck by what the Dean said as well, that you're a man playing this repertoire. And throughout various stages of the planning, people have said to me, women at the piano, you're the conference organizer, you're a man. So I've had some of this myself. And I just wonder what you might say about the reception of what you're doing, and ending on a note of encouragement and how you view this in terms of moving towards integration, that anybody can be doing this work, right?
Yeah, I always say that I'm not interested in that kind of question, as in, not to you. No, as in, yeah, because for me that's genderless. What I do is regardless of my gender. I think it is important that you can see female pianists and male pianists doing this for different reasons. So I know what you mean, and I know what, yeah, but at the same time, I don't want to stick to that. I don't know.
Breaking out of the mold.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, thank you once
Thank
again,
you.
Antonio, for a spectacular evening.
Thank you.